Hi, this is Professor Whitman with a brief lecture on consumer buying behavior. This is meant to give you kind of a taste of what the chapter includes and to understand why this is important to marketers. Let's get started. So consumer behavior basically refers to somewhat of the psychology behind buying behavior. Why do you buy the things you buy? What factors influence that? What choices do you make and why? Where do you choose to shop? Those are all the kinds of things that go into consumer behavior. So it really is a marriage of business and psychology. Companies spend billions trying to unearth this information. And nowadays, there's so much more information available to marketers than there has been in years past, not even 5 years ago. There's even more information available now. When you're online and you're shopping, it tracks you and it can kind of get a sense of your patterns. For example, AI has something to do with this too. You've heard people say that, well, I wasn't on the internet, but I happened to be talking about buying a fleece jacket. And then suddenly you get suggestions in your social media for fleece jackets. And sometimes that's because your Alexa or Siri is listening to you. And so that's they're tracking you with that and kind of understanding your buying behavior. But we really can drill down deep into who our customers are and why they purchase what they do. So situational factors affect consumer buying behavior. You can see these here: store location, physical factors, crowding, social situation, time, purchase reason, and mood. So store location and physical factors, some things can be controlled with that. For example, the physical aspects of the store, whether it's air conditioned or not, the layout, is it easy to navigate? Other things you can't control, the weather, things like that. So physical factors refers to the store. I'm thinking of a recent shopping experience I had. I took my son to JCPenney to get some dress shoes and found some wonderful shoes, but the store was really unkempt. A lot of merchandise laying around. It looked like nobody had really been taking care of how things looked on the floor. So that physical factor, which is a controllable physical factor, made me kind of not want to go back to JCPenney any longer. So that affected my consumer buying behavior. Crowding, if it's a very crowded day in the store, you may walk out and not buy. That affects behavior. Social situation is important too, because there are times when you feel obligations due to social situations. If there's an expected behavior, a need to impress, that kind of thing. So if you feel like, you might make a purchase decision because you're expected to bring a gift to a hostess or something like that. That's where social situations play into it. Time, of course, how much time you have can play into your buying behavior. The purchase reason, that can kind of tie back to social situation or not. And your mood. Sometimes you just feel like going out and spending money. And those are the days that I avoid Target because I will come home with a humongous bill. But it really, sometimes you just don't feel like dealing with crowds. And so you're not going to buy that day. These are all parts of consumer buying behavior. So let's, again, as I said, the physical factors, the store layout, the music played. There's certain types of music that if it's played in the store, it drives me nuts and I don't want to go back. That may sound silly, but it's true. The temperature, all that kind of thing. Then I mentioned the uncontrolled, like the weather or things of that nature that the business just really can't control. So that all affects buying behavior. The circumstances under social situations, again, if you have obligations, you're expected to do something that affects how you buy. Time, the right product, right place, right time, you'll buy it. Reasons, emergency purchase, special occasion gift, is it going to help complete a task? There's all these things factor into your brain, whether you realize it or not, every single time you buy something. And finally, as I said, mood. If you're in a bad mood, you probably aren't going to want to go shopping. So if you're in a good mood, you might spend a little bit more. So it behooves marketers to try to figure out how to put consumers in a good mood so that they will continue to buy. Other factors that are involved here, economic situation, that's really affects, it's how much people can afford. If you're on a really tight budget, you obviously are not going to purchase as much. During economic downturns, people pull back spending because of the uncertainty of it. As we head into a recession, people are pulling back their spending, and we're seeing stores like Walmart actually showing increased sales, because in times of economic uncertainty, stores that target a lower price point see an increase in business. Personality, it's kind of like what it says. It encompasses your unique traits, and that is something that can affect your buying behaviors, as can your self-concept, how we think of ourselves. And this can change from day to day. There are times like if I go clothing shopping and I'm feeling really gross about myself, I don't buy, because I'm like, everything looks terrible, I hate it, I'm going to leave. But if I feel like I'm having a pretty good day, my concept of myself is positive, I might be more willing to shop. Age is definitely part of this. Younger buyers have different needs than older buyers. At all stages of life, we all have different needs and wants. There's the things you want as a teenager, maybe it's a PS5. There's the things you want as a 25-year-old, but you may want the PS5, but you can't, because you have to make grown-up buying decisions. Gender also can play into it. The textbook, I feel, has a little bit stereotypical stuff about gender, which we're actually seeing changes on this front, in that people who, like grocery shopping, we're seeing men do that more often. The textbook used the phrase, women like to shop till they drop. And I really hate that, because that's a stereotype of all women, and it isn't true. Nobody is a monolith. We all are different and have different reasons for doing what we do. Lifestyle, that's basically, how much you spend, where, what are your priorities in life? For example, my lifestyle, I don't have a fancy house or fancy things, but I like to travel. So I have put the emphasis on that. So that lifestyle choice factors into consumer buying behavior. So situational factors, the COVID-19 pandemic was absolutely a situational factor. No one could see it coming until it was on us. And of course, it drastically changed life for everybody all over the world. And we saw an increased demand and very, interesting things. Drive-thrus, video games. Peloton went gangbusters during the pandemic. They are now having problems, and they overproduced. Peloton fell into a trap of at the beginning of the pandemic, they couldn't keep up with demand. Everybody was at home. They wanted a way to stay fit. So they were ordering Pelotons online, and they were back ordered. So Peloton ramped up production and finally got those new units coming out. And by that time, restrictions had eased. And so people weren't as interested in Pelotons, and the market kind of fell out from under them. Home delivery, curbside pickup picked up during that time. But I think it's still on an uptick. People got used to Uber Eats. Everything surrounding the home really went up in demand. And of course, the decreased demand were the things we couldn't do. We couldn't go out to eat in a restaurant. We couldn't go be around other people. So a lot of those businesses really struggled, and many closed, like restaurants and things like that. Motivation plays into how you approach buying, consumer behavior. The thing I always like to say is rent eats first. And what that means is, as a person, as going through this triangle, you have physiological needs, food, water, sleep, safety needs, feeling safe and sheltered from harm. That's where rent would go. So the things that are down here lower on the triangle, those are going to need to be solved or addressed first. And so if your budget's got to go there first, and then as you work up the triangle to self-actualization needs, that's where, if you have, the money left over after you've covered other things, you can invest in those kinds of activities. But again, all of this, it's based on the premise that humans have a series of needs. Some of them have to be met first. Remember, like I said, rent eats first. Everything else follows after that. Trying to find my mouse button, and I'm having a hard time. So perception, this is the five tastes, the five external senses: taste, sight, hearing, touch, and smell. It's how we perceive the world. And where this is important is humans have a wonderful ability to filter out things that don't affect them, things that are irrelevant. We're constantly bombarded with stimuli. And if we are to be productive and not go absolutely crazy, our brains need to turn some of it off. And that's what selective attention is. Same thing with selective retention. There was a day when I could remember all of the phone numbers in my family's book. I can't anymore. I've selectively chosen not to retain that because I have it in my iPhone. But also we forget, it goes a step further than that. We can choose to forget the things that go against what we believe in, things that upset us or against our personal beliefs. We can just knock that out of our brains. Brains are fascinating. So playing on this, there's shock advertising. So surprising stimuli, things that you're like, whoa, what was that? And it grabs your attention. The Centers for Disease Control did this about smoking, and they had some really graphic ads. I don't know if you recall them, but to really shock you into the dangers of smoking and what it's doing to your body. And that really stood out to people, and it got a lot of attention. The research on this as to whether or not it is effective in the long term, the jury's still out. The research is mixed. Some say it's very effective, others not so much. So take that for what you will. And then there is subliminal advertising. We've heard about subliminal messages quite a lot. You see it in the movies, these subtle embedded messages, like just one, frame of a film has something come up on the screen. You barely can see it. But the idea is that goes into your subliminal consciousness. These are banned actually by the Federal Communications Commission. And it is the opposite of shock advertising. They're trying to get into your brain through these really subtle means that you may not even be aware of. But again, it's banned by the FCC. So learning, you're doing that right now. It's the way that after we gain experiences, we change our behavior. So there's operant conditioning, and that's when you get rewarded. This is kind of like when they, like in the lab, a mouse hits a lever and a treat comes out. The dog learns, they're conditioning that dog through, okay, if I do this behavior that they want me to do, I'm going to get a treat. That is operant conditioning. The other big part of this is gamification, and it's a strategy of making things into games that encourages people to buy products or use it more. And a prime example is Peloton. Peloton, with their bikes and treadmills and whatnot, you can log in and you have people on there, you're with other people, and it kind of turns it into, it gives you community, but it's also kind of a game. Maybe not a video game, but it's trying to get you to keep coming back to the Peloton because it's too easy to buy exercise equipment and to just leave it in the corner of the room and drape all your laundry on it. Peloton aimed to break through that by offering all this content and kind of gamifying the situation. Societal factors play a huge role in our buying behaviors. Culture, obviously, we are dictated so much more by our culture than you even realize. And that's religions, ethnic backgrounds, geographic locations, and so on. And then subcultures play into this too. There are subsets of populations within the wider culture, and they can have their own identity and own consumer buying behaviors. Social class definitely plays into it. People who have the same social, economic, or educational status in society kind of have similar buying patterns. Income helps define this for sure, but the primary variable determining social class is occupation. And a good way to think about that is there are some positions, some jobs that have a high social status, like a doctor. And then there are others like a faculty professor. They can have this high social status, but maybe they don't get paid as much as the medical doctor would. That's a definition of social class. They're kind of lumped together in the same social class, even though their incomes are wildly different. Reference groups and opinion leaders influence us. And again, the word influence, influencers, social media, you see that all the time. So opinion leaders, thought leaders, we look to them to kind of guide our way of thinking, and that can affect behavior as well. And as I said, culture is a big deal. Family is actually probably the biggest piece that affects consumer buying behavior. People tend to follow their parents and what their parents did, and It influences household purchases. If we're getting nagged by our parents to do something, we might do it just to make them happy, make a purchase. You know, I'm going to go ahead and go buy car insurance or what have you, based on them telling me I need to do that. So the risk with adjusting as a marketer, your marketing strategy to family is with children. You want to make sure that you are not making direct appeals to children that alienate the parents, because the parents ultimately make the decisions of purchasing, and it's an ethical line. You want to make sure we protect kids. So these are an example of social class and buying patterns. It's not a huge mystery. Upper class, those are the people, that's the 1%. These are people with yachts, and they have a lot of yacht money laying around. And then you can see it goes on down the list. So I consider myself probably middle class, and I drive a Kia. I drive a Kia Sorento, so that tracks, and it encompasses both white collar and blue collar workers. The reason why this is important to know when you're a marketer is it helps you find your people. When you have a product to sell, you want to find the people who that product is geared for, the people who are most likely to buy it. And you know that if your product is a yacht, you don't want to target me. You're going to target these people who are also buying Rolls Royces. If you want to target, middle class, yeah, go for it. But this is why it's important. Target marketing is essential in any marketing strategy, because otherwise your marketing budget and your marketing strategies are a shotgun approach. It's going to hit everybody. And what happens with that is you spend a lot of money and a lot of time and other resources for very little payback. You want to identify those markets, those people that are going to buy your product. That's money well spent. So for example, if I'm on social media and I'm seeing ads for Rolls Royces and yachts, that's a waste of their money to place those ads there, because there's no way I'm buying that. But if it's a Toyota, yeah, I might buy that. So you see that this is why target markets are important. And I'm stressing this because you have some assignments coming up that deal with target markets in your business. There's a number of types of behaviors. Routine response behavior. It's automatic purchase decisions based on past information. So I think of the grocery store when I'm doing my grocery shopping. I just kind of buy the same thing. And I've discovered in myself that a lot of times I'm not even looking at the name on the product. I'm going by the colors and the logo. I recognize what we've bought before and I just buy it. Don't think about it. So, I'm looking for a can of tomatoes. I look for the yellow can, that kind of thing. That's just a routine purchase thing. It's low stakes. So that's what that refers to. Impulse buying, if you've ever been at a Quick Trip or Circle K or even at the grocery store or Target, they have all those little items right by the register. Those are impulse items. They're low price. They're things you're like, well, I deserve a treat. I'm going to buy this little bag of M&Ms, or maybe I need to buy some mints. Those kinds of things that you had no intention of buying, but you just last moment decided to. Low involvement decisions, much like the name implies, these are used for products that have a low risk of failure. So in other words, if you make the purchase and you don't really like it, it's not that big of a deal. You're not out a lot of money. High involvement decisions, these are things like for cars. People really want to research cars because it's a lot of money that you're paying out, and you want to make sure that you're making the best decision because you're going to be tied to this loan for a time. So high involvement, those kinds of things. House buying kind of falls into that, but house buying is a tricky one because when we have shortages in the housing market, like we did, during the pandemic, people kind of lose their minds, and then their consumer buying behavior becomes nearly unpredictable. So that's why I hesitate to throw housing in that bucket. And then extended problem solving. This is what I do anytime, or my husband's very good at this, when we're buying electronics. He's got to read every review. This is when we're digging down into 5,000 reviews on Amazon, that kind of thing, because you want to make sure you are buying the best product with the best solutions for what you're looking for. So it's just a matter of how long it takes you to get to those points. These are the stages in the consumer purchasing cycle. Basically, you recognize you have a need or a want. You'll go find product information, evaluate, choose, purchase, and then evaluate after the fact. and then dispose of the product. It's a full life cycle. And again, this speeds up or slows down depending on whether or not it's a low involvement purchase or a high involvement purchase. And again, that tends to be with, relative to price and the amount of investment that you're making, the stakes, so to speak. Post-purchase dissonance. Sounds like, it's a very fancy word to say people who get upset after they bought something, that they regret. Buyer's remorse is another way to look at this, is, they're unhappy with it. And it isn't necessarily because the product is bad or it's not working the way they thought it would. It's just they're now regretting the decision that they made. That's post-purchase dissonance. The textbook talks about that as well. Marketers, with all of this information handy, marketers have really changed their approach to how they target people and how they reach them. And they've started looking at the whole buying cycle as a journey. From the point where you start out, where I'm going to gather some information and move on through. And so they're really trying to hone in on these different stages of this journey and actually market to that, so they can capture people at each stage, which will be more likely to result in them purchasing their product. That's the hope anyway for these marketers. So some key takeaways as we wrap up this lecture. Situational factors that affect buying behavior. You can see them there in the circle. We talked about that. There are other factors that affect purchase behavior. Maslow's hierarchy of needs certainly affects it, as you have different needs that take different priorities. That affects how you buy. And that is the whole lecture for today. I thought I had another slide, but at any rate, I hope you enjoyed this and it gave you a nice quick overview of the chapter reading. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can see all the contact information here. You can post an IVO, call me, text me, email me. Just make sure you identify yourself if you're texting me, so I know which class you're in and who you are. And of course, you can always sign up for an office hours appointment. There are slots on my schedule. The link to find those slots is on our D2L homepage. I hope you enjoyed this. Take care.